This is apparently the best budget gaming laptop on the market right now, according to Forbes. We recently reviewed what Forbes called the best budget gaming PC under $1,000, and that turned out to be a dumpster fire. So I don't really have high hopes for this laptop, but maybe we'll be surprised. Regardless of what Forbes says, which by the way is, quote, the vanguard of a new generation of gaming laptops, we're gonna fully test this out for ourselves with a full proper review. First, we'll jump into the specs, pricing, benchmarks, and then the physical tour. And of course, we ran this laptop through the paces of games like the new Cyberpunk 2077 and Starfield, and we really gave it a run for its money. Let's talk about all of that after a quick word from today's sponsor.
Today's video is sponsored by GVG Mall, and you probably already know that I've been using them for so long to activate Windows on a ton of my own builds. They're actually running a huge sale right now, which boosts my normal 18% discount up to 25% off if you use code ZTT18, and I'll have that linked at the top of the description. They not only have Windows keys, but also a ton of other stuff such as Office, and even game keys for platforms like Steam, Origin, and Uplay, and they even have console stuff too, like PSN and Xbox prepaid cards as well. Activating Windows is super simple and only takes like 3 minutes total, so activate Windows today and remove that nasty watermark, and don't forget to use ZTT18 for 25% off.
All right, so let's look at the spec sheet first, and we're gonna make this quick because I know anyone can read the brochure. The CPU is an 8-core and 12-threaded Intel i5-12450H. That's 4 performance and 4 E-cores, mind you. There's also 16 gigabytes of DDR4 clocked at 3200 megahertz, a 512 gigabyte NVMe SSD, which is a big downfall, and then the GPU is an RTX 4050 with 6 gigabytes of VRAM. And yes, the RTX 4050 is a real thing, only in laptops for right now, but this does include DLSS 3, which we'll talk about in just a bit. In terms of upgrading the specs, there is actually some room here, literally actually, as there's 2 M.2 SSD slots, and I love to see that. I actually installed a second 2TB NVMe drive in addition to the 512 that's on there already. That way we could fit our benchmarking game library, and this is probably exactly what someone else would do if they needed more storage. This way they don't have to completely swap out the SSD that's in there, go through reinstalling Windows and all that. They can just add a second drive. The RAM is also upgradable, as the 16 gigabytes is in fact a 2x8 gigabyte kit, and both of these DIMMs are removable. Lots of laptops these days are coming with 1 or even 2 soldered DIMMs that you can't really upgrade. So again, I love to see this here. We're off to a pretty decent start. But now let's move on to pricing before we start benchmarking, and here's where Forbes has the potential to be fake news. To defend them at first though, laptops are the type of product that randomly go on sale, and sometimes the sales can be huge, so it's honestly pretty tough to compare laptop price to performance when the prices are always fluctuating. It does look like this Gigabyte G5 MF sticks at around $1,000, which is good, but there are a couple of other models that are at the same price point with better specs. Here's another version of the same G5 MF laptop, but with a better i5-12500F and an RTX 4060, and that's been hovering around $920 to $950 for a few weeks now. The only downside is that it comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM, but I already explained that you can upgrade that, and that really wouldn't be that expensive. This is a much better price to performance option, as both the CPU and GPU will have a significant increase in gaming performance, and I would honestly recommend going down this route instead of what Forbes said. Here's another laptop that I found on Amazon. This is the MSI Thin GF63, and this has a 12th gen i7, which is even better, and another RTX 4050, and this one's about $900, so $100 cheaper than this one. Again, I recommend this model over the one we're looking at today, at least from a price to performance standpoint. For everything else though, it does look like $1,000 is the standard price right now for a brand new RTX 4050 laptop, and other than that Gigabyte RTX 4060 model that we just looked at, most 4060 laptops are around $1,100 to $1,200. This does indicate that this laptop's price is pretty competitive, but I would recommend the other models over this one, at least in terms of price to performance. But speaking of price to performance, we actually have to evaluate what this laptop is capable of, and here there's some good news and some bad news, unfortunately. We'll start with the bad news, since that's just typically how I roll. And I fired up Cinebench 2024 and saw that the CPU was almost immediately jumping up to 97 degrees.
It was like 97 degrees. It was hot. 97 degrees, not hot?
And then it finally downclocks a full gigahertz, and the temperature stabilized around 80 degrees. This is some serious thermal throttling, so we're not getting the full capability of our 12450H. And when running Cyberpunk 2077, I saw it hover around 90 to 93 degrees, which is bad news. The GPU, on the other hand, was cooled perfectly fine. After a 10-minute Cinebench run with it staying at around 90% utilization, it was averaging a nice 69 degrees.
Nice.
No issue here whatsoever. Going back to Cyberpunk though, I ran the game with 1080p high settings and got a super clean 63 FPS average, but that's with the new DLSS 3 turned on. Without it, which is the footage you're seeing now, I only average around 50 FPS, and although that's not a huge difference in FPS, it is in fact the difference between above or below 60 FPS, at least for 1080p high. The RTX 4000 series GPU, even though it's only a 4050, does come in clutch here, and that may pay dividends as more and more games take advantage of it, something to consider. Next up, I ran 3D Mark's Time Spy and got a score of 7,320, and that's kind of decent for a $1,000 price point, but only for a laptop. For reference, my $1,000 brand new desktop build guide from 2 months ago scored 12,794. That's a 75% increase, so that's the difference between the value of a laptop versus a desktop, if you were wondering. The $1,000 desktop that Forbes said was the best got a score of 8,646, but that was pretty bad value for $1,000. After that, I tested the brand new Starfield, and man, let me just say how much I'm personally enjoying this game. I haven't been able to play nearly as much as I want, obviously, but I am up to like level 17 or so, and I think I'm more than halfway through the main storyline. It's been so much fun. I don't typically resonate with single player storyline driven games, as I usually gravitate towards MMOs instead, New World Expansion anybody, but this one has me hooked, although it does have GPUs begging for mercy. Our RTX 4050 did survive the test though, as we got a smooth 64 FPS, but that's with 1080p and low settings with a 100% resolution scale and 0 upscaling. I actually found it funny that we were getting like 53 FPS when looking at a bunch of textures, and it would immediately jump up 20 FPS or more when looking off into the mountains. This is a super demanding title. And the last game we have footage for is Forza Horizon 5, and that's honestly just because Sam's been out of the office all week, so I wanted to benchmark another title with a built-in benchmarking tool, and in 1080p with ultra settings and RTX turned off, we got 87 FPS, pretty solid. But now let's talk about the physical tour of the laptop, because there are things that I love here, but also most things that I hate. Price and performance definitely isn't everything when it comes to purchasing a laptop, because it's important how the laptop physically feels, how durable it is, what ports and I/O you get, and just the overall comfort of using it. For starters, I am not a fan of both the keyboard and trackpad, and I don't think any gamer would be happy with this. The keys are backlit, which is a plus, but they feel super mushy and doesn't give you any sort of satisfaction when using it. Same thing with the trackpad, it's as plasticky as plastic gets, and the top like quarter doesn't even click down when you press it, which is super weird and inconsistent. The whole thing rattles when you click it as well. They definitely cheaped out here. Where they also cheaped out is the webcam, and oh my goodness, I wouldn't normally care about this, but this is just hilariously terrible. Most people don't care about the quality of webcams and laptops, but if you were someone that does, you would definitely need to purchase an external one yourself. Not only is this 720p quality, but it's also pixelated like you're watching TV from the early 2000s. This is shockingly awful. What's not awful is your port selection though, and this is actually pretty good. On the left side, we have a Kensington lock, 2 USB type A ports, and a microphone and headset port. On the right side, there's a micro SD slot. Why they didn't just do a full-size slot is beyond me. And there's also Thunderbolt 4 and Ethernet. And finally, on the back, we have a USB type C, HDMI, mini display port, and the power port. This laptop does come with a standard power brick. It's not that big. Now, one thing I've been really enjoying about my MacBook, which is what I've been daily driving for the last year or so, is that you can very easily open up the lid with just one finger without holding it down with the other hand. And for this Gigabyte laptop, actually, that wasn't too bad, but usually it fails miserably. Like that. Not terrible though. The entire build is just a ton of plastic, doesn't feel high quality whatsoever, but honestly, this is probably what you should expect from a budget laptop. It's usable, but not great or comfortable. The other thing that could cause some discomfort is the sound, both from a speaker's perspective and a cooling perspective. For the speakers, I wouldn't say they're amazing quality or anything, but they sure get obnoxiously loud, and you would never need to max these out unless you're hosting a party. For cooling though, the jet engine fans that cool the CPU would instantly force all of your guests to get out of the building. I couldn't believe just how loud the CPU fan gets when running Cinebench, and we know you're not going to be pushing the CPU to 100% utilization too often, but if your workload involves that, then honestly, I wouldn't even consider this laptop. It's just too loud. When under a normal gaming workload where the GPU is being pushed more, it definitely becomes audible, but no louder than what I would consider a normal range for laptop gaming. Now, one thing I wanted to quickly explain is that we were having a very weird HDMI port issue on this laptop, but I don't think it's going to affect most people. Whenever we were plugging in our HDMI cable that runs into our capture card so we can record our benchmarks, the highest output that we were able to get was 720 by 480, obviously a terrible resolution. When you plug this into a normal monitor directly, there's zero issues whatsoever, so most people will be perfectly fine, but for whatever reason, our capture card would only read the signal as 720 by 480. We've benchmarked literally hundreds of gaming PCs PCs over the years with that exact capture card, and I've never seen this issue before, so something is a little funky with this port, but I'm not smart enough to realize why. Overall though, I'm not a huge fan of the physical aspect of the laptop, as I think Gigabyte cut a lot of corners here, and I don't even agree with Forbes on a price to performance level that this is the best option available for under 1,000 bucks. We already explained which models will be better, and with random laptop sales that pop up all the time, I'm sure you could easily find better deals with better performance. And if you want to see how Forbes did with the best $1,000 gaming desktop, then feel free to check out the video that's on the screen now.